This is the second session of Mishnah in Depth, Bava Kamma, part of the summer zman at Drisha. We have the pleasure of learning with Rabbi Alex Israel. This class is a project of Drisha's Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored in her memory by her family. Thank you for joining Rabbi Alex Israel for these past few Sundays and more Sundays going forward. Just a reminder that the Mishnah in-depth class is a weekly shiur to supplement daily Mishnah study along the Mishnah Yomit schedule. Thank you everyone who's either joining us to start Nezikin or has been with us for a bit. For those who aren't familiar, Rabbi Alex Israel is an author, educator, and an international lecturer and a teacher at Eretz HaTzvi and Midrashet Lindenbaum. He records a daily 9 to 9 podcast, the Tanakh podcast. And with that, I want to pass things along to Rabbi Israel for what I hope is a full hour of learning.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So welcome. Anybody who is an attendee but not a panelist is welcome to become a panelist, and then we can see you. Deborah, it's great to see you. Chana, Yasmin, and everybody else who is on here. Beth, and who I saw Natan, great, Lise. So good to see everybody. And we are going to continue. Last time I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so last time, as you can see, I'm literally reading the sheet here. We introduced Seder Nezikin. We spoke about the division into Bava Kamma, Bava Metzia, and Bava Batra, and the fact that it had been Seder Nezikin, and that there was a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, and this division, and that's why it's in Aramaic, is actually a Babylonian division into 3 categories, whereas in Eretz Yisrael it was one long Masechet of 30 chapters. We spoke about the notion of categorization of law and the different ordering of laws in the Torah and in the Mishnah. So we went through the verses in the Torah, and then we looked a little bit about what the Mishnah was trying to do in restructuring halacha. And last time we actually didn't even get to it, but if we look at the first Mishnah is Arba Avot Nezikim. There are 4 categories of law. There is, in fact, a Tosefta which says that there are 11 categories of damage. And then there is another Braita which says there are 24 categories of damage. And the question, of course, is how narrowly do you define this? And we'll talk about this literally in 2 minutes, trying to analyze this. We spoke a little bit about structure of chapter 1 and chapter 2. Maybe I'll go over that today. And we discussed a little bit if there are 4, or is it 5, or is it 6 avot of damages. So let's try and talk a little bit about that in now. And what we're really going to do today is actually study chapter 1 and chapter 2, maybe a bit of chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Bava Kamma, and try and really get to understand some of the guiding principles and applications of those principles when it comes to Bava Kamma. And also, I was thinking about it today, because last time I asked people how much experience people had had with Mishnah, and many people said precious little. And I was thinking about the fact that certainly children who grow up I don't know about the modern Orthodox system. I grew up in a sort of Haredi tinted education system. All of my teachers throughout school were more, let's call it black hat for want of a better definition. And I remember very clearly when we were 9 years old, we started learning, maybe even earlier, we started learning Mishnah. It was interesting. They divided I went to a co-ed school, but at a certain age, they divided the boys from the girls. The girls learned Dinim, and they learned Nach, and the boys learned Mishnah and then Gemara. And this is one of my earliest memories, learning Bava Kamma. So if this is complicated, you should be aware that in the average yeshiva education system, this is what boys are learning at age 7 or 8 or 9. So it becomes a very deep bedrock of people's Torah Shabbat pair learning, the learning of oral law, and if these categories seem sort of confusing, when you absorb them at such a young age, they really become part of the how should I put it? The processor, right? You know, we talk about a processor with a computer. They're part of the processor whereby you can sort of begin to analyze things. So I'm going to go back
Why
to the
do they
first.
begin with that? Excuse me. Why do you begin with something so complicated?
I don't think it's seen as complicated. I think it's seen as basic. And there is this concept that if you want to get to the core of Torah Shabbat Peh, so they'll probably start off at a younger age learning Masechet Brachot and learning maybe a few Masechtot which are irrelevant. But if they want to sort of initiate you into the bread and butter of, learning, they'll start it with Mishnah and with these mishnayot. And the truth is that boys who are, as we'll see today, I mean, one of the funnest Mishnahs, I loved it when you were going to see third chapter today, where you've got one person and he leaves his jar in the street and somebody trips over it. And that's a lot of fun for 7 and 8 year old boys. Like it's slapstick comedy. It's stuff that goes on in the playground all the time. You've got so many examples. People break other people's things in school or lose them. And therefore, these are things that people are very excited to learn. So let's just go again. I'm going to try and I felt maybe things were I went a little fast last time, so I'm going to try and slow down a little bit. And I'm going to start again with the first Mishnah and try and establish some ground principles. And so let's start with that. Arba, I'm reading from the first Mishnah of Bava Kamma. Arba avot nezikim. You should see it on your screen. There are 4 categories or 4 primary causes of injury: the ox, the pit, the crop-destroying beast, and fire. A shiur, a bor, v'hamaveh, v'hever. Okay, that's how we're going to now. So let me help a little bit, and what you will see is that in fact, these are the 4 categories. Okay, we've got a shiur who is going to be an ox who's going to actually gore. Then we've got what's called maveh, the crop-destroying animal. That's how they translated it. And the easiest way to translate it for us is foot and mouth. I don't mean that foot and mouth, but in other words, animals will walk on things and they will also eat things. Okay, so they might just walk into a field and, trample the tomatoes that you've been growing all winter, or they might eat them. And then you have fire, which spreads, and then you have a pit, which things can fall into. By the way, again, let me try and explain. Example of a pit, for example, might be exactly that case we spoke about, where you leave something in the street. Okay, if you leave some broken glass in the street, that would be a good example for us, and somebody ruins their shoes or cuts themselves on it, right? Or if you left an obstacle and somebody tripped on it. So that would be an example of pit. An example of fire in today's world, well, it could really be fire, but we'll see an example of somebody was cutting wood in their garden and the wood flies out somewhere else. Okay, that's not an animal, but that is an inanimate object which flies forth and attacks something else, and that might be a derivative. These are called avot, and av means a primary category, a damaged category, and then you have toladot, which are really applications. So those are the four categories. Now, I want you to be aware that even within the 4, you will notice we really have 5, okay? Because we have the ox, which is goring. That's an animal. Then we have your foot and your mouth. Now, not your mouth, the animal's mouth. Now, of course, animals trample some things and they cause damage by trampling, but they also eat. Now, there's a difference between trampling and eat. Trampling is something they don't notice. Eating is something they do notice, right? Trampling is something, if they trampled on my laptop and ruined it, or if they trampled on my, I just bought some new clothes and they walked all over it, or I was hanging out the laundry and they rolled all over it, they might ruin my clothes. Okay, but a mouth is different. They've actually eaten something. So they've actually gained some sort of benefit. So those are already 2 categories. So it's really 4, which is 5. And then there's, of course, fire and the bar of the pit. But there's a 6th one. And the 6th one is going to be the human. So as I wrote here in number 5 on the sheet, you have goring, you have shein, which is eating, you have regel, which is treading, that's actually 3, the bar, which is the pit, you have eish, which is fire, and you have human beings. So really we say of arba avot nezikin, and a lot of tractates start with arba. A lot of tractates start with the number 4. It's a very standard number in the Mishnah. But funnily enough, we're actually going to see pretty much 6. So I know that's confusing, but let's I'm just putting it out there so we all, because we're going to need to deal with these 6 categories. Let's just read the first Mishnah, and it says, Lo haria shor karia maveh, v'lo haria maveh karia shor. In other words, goring is not the same as eating or treading. Why? Because goring is when my animal lunges at somebody else and decides to actually go and be aggressive. Whereas there's nothing aggressive about treading or eating. That's a very normal activity for an animal. But if you have a dog who decides to bite somebody, or that's not a normal activity. Okay? So it already says the rules of shor are not like the rules of maver. And the rules of maver are not like the shor. V'lo zeh v'zeh, and both of these, sheyesh b'hem ruach chayim, and these which are alive are not like a fire which is not alive, right? Fire has no independent life. The fire will go wherever the wind takes it, right? Whereas animals will follow their animal instincts. Do you understand? Like, there's a certain predictability in what the animals will do. There isn't a predictability necessarily in what fire will do. That's why it becomes a different category. Okay? And yet, what are we now going to say? So, on the one hand, right, the animal is alive, which fire is not alive. Right? Nor is the distinct feature of any of these, which is its way to go forth and do injury, like that of the pit, whose way is not to go forth and do injury. Let me explain. Let me go back to my table, which I tried to make. So I make this a little. You've got the shor, the goring ox, and the foot and mouth, and both of these are alive. They've got ruach chayim. But then you've got hever, which is fire, and it has no independent life form. It is not propelled from inside, it's propelled by something from the outside. And yet, each of these 3 categories, the first 3, actively damage things. In other words, I'm standing here and they assault me. An ox comes and gores me, a dog comes and bites me. Or they will come and eat my food, or they will eat my, I don't know, my knapsack, right? And or they'll tread on whatever it might be. So they're actively damaging. Same with fire. Fire will actually come and it could, burn my car. But then a pit is something different, because in a pit, I'm going to get damage, but I walked into it. It's a passive one. I stepped on the glass. Understand the difference? That's how it gets to be a different category. Because this is not actively damaging, it's stationary damage. I have created something which is a hazard, but it's a stationary hazard, but people are going to walk into it. Okay? So this is how we get to these 4 basic categories. Anybody want to ask anything? Okay, so let's go back to Mishnah number 1. I'm sorry, I'm not making you dizzy. And let's just pay attention to what they have in common. What they have in common, or in the Hebrew, what they have in common, it is that normal for them to do injury. And you're responsible for looking after them. And by the way, I'll deal with those 2 phrases in a second. And if they do damage, and if you do damage, you have to make restitution with the best of your land. In other words, you have to pay back with a full currency. I can't give you, for example, let's say I need to pay you because my animal ate your favorite shirt, right? And my animal ate your shirt, so I'm going to give you my old shirt, right? Because it's an old shirt. You already wore it 20 times, right? And you're going to say to me, but I don't want your old shirt. I want to, either money or I want something that I can sell, which will give me the value of my shirt, right? Because I need to buy a new one, and I really like that one. And that's what it means. You've got to pay with the best of his land, the meitav haaretz. You can't give them something which is second rate. When you're paying for this, you have to pay with, a currency which people can use. Okay, so this is establishing the 4 types of damage. Now, I want to go back to what they have in common is their way to do injury and that you're responsible for caring over them. And what's really interesting here is there's a big discussion in the commentaries about what the source of damage is, what the source of responsibility is. Let me explain. Let's say I parked my car and I put on the handbrake, right? Everything seemed normal. And then at a certain point, for whatever reason, which I don't understand, my car started rolling down the road and it went bang into your car, or even worse, God forbid, it, hurt somebody. Now, I looked after my car. My car was locked. I had done its regular test. But something happened. I don't know what happened. Do I say, I didn't have any negligence? I didn't have any negligence. Something weird happened, and therefore I'm not responsible. Or do you say, well, it's your car. Your car did damage, right? And therefore you're responsible. Where does the responsibility come from? Is it a fact that I'm negligent in some way? Or even if I was fully responsible, right? Might I be? The fact is, just because it is my thing, I'm responsible. And that's one of the big questions that is going to underlie this question. What's the degree of culpability? Does culpability come because, obviously, if I go and punch somebody or if I go and hurt somebody, I'm responsible. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that I own. Sorry. We're talking about something that I own, which is causing damage. And the degree is, to what degree is it an extension of me? And that's going to be one of the biggest questions that we're going to deal with in these mishnayot. Okay? So what we've dealt with so far is that these different categories, and each one of these categories is going to have a sort of different set of rules. Okay? I'm going to miss out Mishnah 2. And by the way, that one of the issue that I just raised is the beginning of Mishnah 2 as well. Kol shechavti b'shmirato. Anything that I'm responsible to guard, iksharti et nisko. I've rendered it possible to do injury, for which I'll be obligated, right? You understand? And even though I partially rendered it possible to do injury, I must make restitution for the injury that I totally rendered it possible to do injury. In other words, I might say, well, yes, I left a broken bottle in the street, but how many people are going to actually walk on the side of the street, right? So if that's the case, then what we're saying is, even if you only caused a small possibility of damage, you still are responsible for all the damage. These.
Hi, good morning. So we were talking last time about what is typical for something to cause damage. So would the question be whether it was typical for a car to roll that had been properly braked?
Right, exactly. So we're going to talk about that very, very soon. And we're going to talk about that. So we raised it already last time with the question of tam and muad, and that's our next topic. Okay, so I'm going to go to that. That's going to be in Mishnah 4. And then once we establish these principles, we are then going to go read through chapter 2, and we'll see how they all come into reality. Okay, so that's great. So let's see. So Debbie, you wanted to ask something? Yes.
Yeah. This sounds very similar to when you discuss shogeg and mazid. So there's shogeg that's karov lemezid, and if you are responsible, or when somebody is punished, when you're killing somebody, and there's a whole spectrum of if it was on purpose, if it was manslaughter, if it was murder.
Right. So you're right that there is a question, of course, of degrees of culpability. One of the, for example, let's say I usually can tie up my horse or tie up my dog, but let's say I tie up my dog in the sun. At a certain point, the dog in the sun is going to start going a bit berserk. So usually tying is fine, but now I've left it in a situation whereby it's going to be in a situation where it's going to be more likely to become, irritable and upset, right? So we're definitely going to have those. What is a situation I could never have predicted? What is a situation that was reasonable to predict? What is a situation which is normal? Yeah, that whole range. That's what's going to come up here. You're 100% right. Somebody else. Lise, you still have your hand up? No, you're good. Okay, sorry. Anybody else? Who else wanted to ask? Because I'm Chana.
Just a comment to bring in from chat.
I-
Horses are not immune from causing some of this damage.
Okay, fine. Great, Chana.
I was just wondering if there's any discussion at all about responsibility on the part of the injured party, like having a fence around his field, or any sort of mitigating factors there.
Oh yeah, we're definitely going to see that. Okay, that's all going to be there. So everything's got to be factored in. So let's jump down to Mishnah 4 here, which I did last time, but I'm going to do it again. And 1 minute, let me just make sure that I'm following the pattern that I said I was going to do. Okay, so I'm now going to move to C on the first page, and I want to talk about the difference between tam and mu'ad. And these are phrases used in the Torah, tam and mu'ad. Tam literally means simple. Mu'ad is the word which actually means warned. So tam is going to be an animal or a situation which is unwarned or unexpected, uncharacteristic. And the interesting thing about tam is you pay half the amount. Whereas mu'ad is when the animal was warned, or we expect that this is absolutely anticipated or predictable behavior. And for that, you pay full payment. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this in the Talmud in a second. But first, let's see the way that the Mishnah talks about it. I'm going to page 2. And we're going to go to Mishnah 4. Okay, Mishnah 4, I hope people can see it on the screen. Here we go. Okay, so it says here, Chamisha tamim v'chamisha mu'adim. There are 5 agents of damage, and here they translate it as who are harmless. Now I will argue they're not quite harmless, but they're certainly unexpected. They've never done it before. They're first-time offenders. It wasn't anticipated. And 5 are an attested danger. So look at this. Cattle are not an attested danger to butt, to push, to bite, to lie down, or to kick. Okay, so I don't expect a cow or a sheep walking through the street to kick me, right? Or to lie down on my stuff, or to bite me, or to push me, or to butt me. I don't expect that. Most animals, tame animals, we understand, okay? So those are 5 things, right? Butt, push, bite, lie down, or kick. We don't expect animals to do. And therefore, if they do that, you're not going to have to pay full amount for it, because you were not irresponsible. You were responsible. You were leading your animal through the street. You didn't expect it to bite. When it bit, it was a surprise. It was an unusual activity. It was something that they never usually do. And by the way, some of you might be dog owners, and you might say there might be rules about where you have to be muzzled, a dog has to be muzzled or whatever. But here, maybe they're talking about a sheep or something like that. Yes, so, or a cow. Okay. Now it says, What is mu'ad? What is an attested danger? So I'm reading here from where it says, the tooth, shame. The tooth of an animal is an attested danger to eat that which is for. In other words, animals eat things that are food. Okay? The animal is not going to eat my scarf. Okay? Do you understand? So in Hebrew, Hashem wedet lecholet hara'uila. Animals eat what animals eat. I don't know, maybe a goat eats everything, but a cow doesn't usually eat a scarf. Yes, I'm seeing vigorous nodding here. But a dog is not going to eat your scarf, right? You know, whatever it is. So, in fact, we even have a concept with certain foods about ra'i la'achilat kelev. What would a dog usually eat, right? So, and okay, so haregel wedet l'shaber b'derech hulcha. It's normal for the leg of an animal to break things as it walks along. That's to be expected. Okay. V'shor hamuad, right? And the third one is when we have a warned ox. In other words, an ox that gone before. In other words, once you have a track record as an ox of actually damaging things, then you have to expect once the dog is bit once, it's going to bite again. Well, maybe it might be 3 times. And an ox that damages in the domain of a damaged party. This is really interesting. Hannah asked before about, what about, do I have to make a fence around my field? What they're telling you here is that if an ox damages in the domain of the damaged party, in other words, right, I am fully culpable for my animal if it walks into your garden. I can't say, you know, in other words, I have to watch my animal. It doesn't go into anybody else's domain. The animal can walk in the street, and it can be in my yard or in my farm. If it walks into your farm, then I'm culpable for everything. Okay, does that make some sense? And the last one is human beings, right? Human beings, ha'adam, as we're going to see, human beings are always culpable. That's fascinating. In other words, a human can never claim, I could never have thought of that. We can always think about something. Now, again, of course, how far does that go, right? If chas v'shalom, I'm driving along the road and I don't know, a ball comes out at me and I swerve and, you know, and then hit something that I shouldn't have hit. What happens then, right? Actually, there was recently a book which was written in jail by a guy who had exactly that situation. He was driving along the road. Somebody ran out of the road. He swerved to avoid the person who ran out into the road and killed somebody else. And he was, you know, he actually killed somebody. It was a total mistake and it wasn't his fault. And yet it's called manslaughter. And he was sent to jail for a certain amount of time. And he wrote an entire book about his experience in jail and how he dealt with his sense of guilt. It's actually a very interesting book because, you know, it talks about, you know, how does the person, you know, deal with, and it relates a lot to, like, in our tradition, the ir miklat, when you have somebody who murders by accident, right? What's their role, right? So the last thing about Tam Muad is at the end of this Mishnah, right at the bottom here. I'm highlighting it right now. Ma bein Tam Muad. What is the difference between that which is harmless and that which is attested danger? The harmless pays half damages from its own body, and the attested danger pays full damages from the best property of its owner and guardian. In other words, here we see a critical difference. If there is an unexpected damage, you do pay, okay, but you only pay half the payment. And you only pay half the payment to a limit. So, like, for example, let's say my goat swallowed a diamond ring or destroyed something, destroyed a priceless Picasso. So I would only, it's not usual for a goat to eat a painting or for a cow to eat a painting. But let's say they did that and it was unexpected. I pay half the value, but I can only pay up to the limit of the thing which did the damage. In other words, I can sell my cow and pay that, but not more than that. Whereas if it's a muad, If it is an attested danger, I have to pay however much it is. So if I knew that my dog really likes Picassos and likes eating them for lunch, right? And I knew that he had a tendency to do that, then I would have to sell everything I own. I would have to pay back full damages because I knew that my dog had a tendency to do all that. Okay, all of this is theory. And we might come back to more of the theory of Chatzi Nezek, half damage. Of course, maybe I'll mention it now. The question is, why is there a rule of half damage? They say, if you're not culpable, you shouldn't pay anything. If you are culpable, right, then you should pay all of it. What's this idea of unexpected damage, I only pay half, right? You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So why would it be? And here there's a big debate. I actually put the debate in the Talmud on our first page. Let's see if we can find it. Here it is. I'll just read a little bit of the Talmud. Chatzi Nezek. Let's hope this is in the right way. Rav Papa Amar Mamona Kasavar. The Rav Papa said the payment is monetary restitution, and he holds that even ordinary oxen, which have not been forewarned with regard to goring, are not presumed to be safeguarded. In other words, why do you pay half the damage? They say you've always got to watch your ox. Your ox might never have gored anyone. You've always got to watch it. You can never be sure that your dog won't bite somebody. Dog might bite somebody. So you have to always keep the dog on the leash and make sure, because dogs can be a bit uppity sometimes, and somebody they don't like the smell of or whatever it is, they could do that. So even if they've never done it before and you've had this dog for 5 years, you never know, right? So then you're going to say, fine. So if you can expect it, then why only half, right? And so he says, I'll just read the English here. So he says, the payment is monetary restitution as he holds that even ordinary oxen who have not been forewarned with regard to goring are not presumed to be safeguarded, as their nature does not prevent them from acting in a belligerent manner. Therefore, the owner is responsible to safeguard them, to prevent them from doing so. Accordingly, if an ox causes damage by goring, by right, it should be that the owner should need to pay the full amount of damage. Nevertheless, the merciful one had pity upon him, as his ox had not yet been forewarned. In other words, I should be paying everything, but since you're a first-time offender, and we don't want everybody to be constantly frantic, and remember, we're in an environment where there are lots of dogs around. You have to muzzle your dog. How far do you have to protect your dog, right? So we're saying most dogs don't bite. Most dogs can even be off a leash and not cause trouble, unless they have a bad history. And therefore, it's a pretty normal thing to do. You have to pay something, but until it's got a category of a dangerous dog, we won't make you pay. Rav Huna says exactly the opposite way around. He says, it never happened before. You're not responsible. Rav Huna, the son of Yeshua, said it's a fine. As he holds the ordinary oxen are presumed to be safeguarded. I assume your dog isn't a bitey dog. Your dog isn't going to bite. Their nature prevents them from acting usually, but dogs don't bite. Therefore, the owner is not responsible for safeguarding them to prevent them from doing so. So why do they pay half the damage? Why do they not pay at all? And the answer is that the Torah, or God, penalized him in order that he will safeguard his ox. In other words, since your dog just bit, right, what am I going to do? I'm going to give you a fine. What happens when we get a fine? We make sure we won't park there in the future, right? If we parked in a problematic space, we'll probably do it again if we don't get a fine. But when we get a fine for speeding, whatever, I didn't notice the speedometer. So, oh, sorry, policeman. I didn't realize I was going 20 miles an hour above the speed limit. It seemed fine for me. But once we got that fine from the policeman, we'll be much more careful to check it, right? So the question, there's a big debate amongst what's called the Amoraim, the sages of the Talmud, about Chatzi Nezek, half damage. Am I essentially guilty, but they gave me sort of a reduction because it wasn't expected? Or am I essentially not guilty, but they gave me a fine? And that's the mystery around Chatzi Nezek. Okay? When do you pay Chatzi Nezek? When something is not anticipated. When something happens, which isn't a total freak accident, it's in the realm of possibility, but it's certainly not a normal behavior. Okay. Let's see how this plays out in the Mishnah.
Can I
And-
ask you a question?
Sure, Debbie.
If you have an ox that had gored once already, can you walk with that in the public domain?
So here we actually have a debate. Let's skip down to chapter 2, Mishnah 4. I don't know how many people are using their Mishnah in front of them, but if let's take a look. So here we go. You're asking a question that is directly addressed in Mishnah 4, which you should see in front of you. Okay? Ezel tam ve'ezel mu'an. Which kind of animal is accounted harmless, and which is an attested danger? Okay? And you're going to see two opinions here. The first opinion is Rabbi Yehuda, and the second opinion is Rabbi Meir. Okay? These are both Talmidim, by the way, of Rabbi Akiva. I'll maybe say something which is an aside, but you know, we're all familiar with the story of Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students who were killed. And either, according to one version, they're killed by a plague. Probably historically, they were killed in the Bar Kokhba revolt. Right? And Rabbi Akiva himself was killed in the aftermath of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And it seems like Rabbi Akiva had a huge following of 24,000 students. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but he had lots and lots of students. And then it says, the Talmud tells us, that in fact, he then took only 5 students, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi, I've forgotten the last one, and he taught them Torah, and from them, the Torah was saved. It's fascinating that 80% of the Mishnah of named opinions come from those 5 students of Rabbi Akiva, right? In other words, we're talking about the Bar Kokhba result was in the year 135. Broadly put, let's put it this way. If I go according to secular years, from 0 to about year 40, year 30, is Shammai and Hillel. Let's say from year 30 to year 70 is Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. From year 70 to about year 100, okay, is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's the leading man. Then after that, we have the generation of, about, let's say, 100 to 130, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. We then move to Rabbi Akiva as the linchpin, and then the next generation is these 5 students of Rabbi Akiva. And then the final generation is the generation of Rebbe, when everything is sort of put into a textual form and codified. Okay, so we can sort of like almost think out the generations there until about the year 200 when the Mishnah was codified. So here we're seeing 2 students of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, are discussing this point. Again, I'll read the Mishnah. Mishnah 4. Ezeu itam ve'ezeu muad. What is an animal that is not aggressive or that is not expected to damage or accounted harmless? And what is mu'ad? What is an attested danger? Mu'ad? Kol she'idu bo shlosha yamim. Right? So in other words, you have to have done it 3 days in a row. In other words, you took your dog out for a walk on day 1, on day 2, and day 3, and each time it bit somebody. And what's the tam? Mishiachzor bo shlosha yamim. You took it out for the same walk around people, and it didn't bite. So you clearly got over whatever it was in. That's Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Meir says, Mu'ad she'idu bo shalosh pa'amim. It's enough that it just happens 3 times. It could have happened last year. It could have happened, 3 years ago. 3 times. 3 times in your out, right? The tongue calls you tinakot min mashmishim bo ve'eino nogeach. It has to be that there are children who are, and children, they're petting the animal. They're not so, they. You want to be 100% sure that you're going to, that child is not going to chas v'shalom lose a finger or something like that. You have to be very sure that children can be around this animal without the animal doing something. It has to be a very docile animal. So here you've got a discussion between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about what degree of experience we would need. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, listen, animals develop patterns of behavior. If you can track it and you know that it was aggressive last week, but this week you put it in the same test and it hasn't been aggressive, we're good. Rabbi Meir says once you're a 3 times offender, I don't care what the distance is between the particular incidents, but it's not after 1 time, Debbie, it's after 3 times, establishing a pattern. Okay, so that's it regarding animals.
Thank you.
Okay, so great. So I want to go back to the beginning of this chapter because I think we can start really seeing the principles that we've already spoken about coming into their own here, and let's see how it works. Okay, so let's read from chapter 2, Mishnah 1. How is the leg of an animal attested to break what it tramples on as it walks on its way? In other words, we already established in chapter 1 that it's normal for animals not to be attentive about what they walk on. And they don't know whether they're walking on a pavement or they're walking on a set of crockery, right? And if they walked on a set of crockery, they'd put their foot down and they wouldn't notice it, or they don't know that they're walking on a box of eggs. So they broke all your eggs. They didn't notice. Okay? So it says, an animal is attested that it just walks along and it breaks things. Interesting. But what isn't it used to? But an animal is not going to kick at things. Or where's the chatzi nezek? In other words, the is one of 2 situations. Number 1, if an animal kicked and hurt somebody or damaged something. Or let's say my animal is walking on the road and indeed it stepped on something and it broke a jar. So I'm going to have to pay full damage to the jar. Why? Because we know that animal doesn't pay attention what it does with its jar, right? Good so far? But let's say when he treaded on the jar, a shard went out from the jar and now smashed my car window. That's what we call secondary damage, okay? That's causal damage. So for the jar, I will pay nezek shalem. I will pay full damage. For the car window, I'll pay secondary damage. Now, by the way, that's a really interesting, there are loads of discussions about this. This is what is known as srorot, pebbles. Because like if a pebble sort of like went out on a trajectory from under the foot, what exactly happens with that, right? I mean, on the one hand, of course, that's not predictable. We know that it steps on things. We didn't think that it would shoot something out and then that thing would hurt. That's unusual. That's a bit of a freak incident, right? And is it that option A, that it's sort of referred damage? You understand what I mean? It's like a multi-car pile-up sort of thing, if you understand what I mean. I didn't know the car A would go into car B, go into car C, go into car D, right? Is it that? Or is it simply that it's just not predictable? Whichever way, that's the rule. Here's another few examples. Darsal hakli v'shibarto. If it stepped on something and broke it, for example, it stepped on my tablecloth and it broke it, my new, I don't know, North Face jacket, and it tore it. V'nafal kli ushvaro. Again, if it stepped on a jar and it broke the jar, and then the jar itself broke on something else and damaged it, on the first one, you pay full damages. So you have damage from the foot of the animal, and then referred damage, and that's chatzi nezek, that's half damages. Here's another example. You've got your chickens. They hop on things, and they break them. So let's say you've got a nice sculpture in the garden, which is like very carefully balanced, right? And the chicken jumps on it and knocks it over. So it's your chicken, you have to pay. By the way, a lot of these are things happening in the street. Remember, we're not used to having animals in the street, but as far as they were concerned, you had horses in the street and you had livestock in the street. That was a very normal thing. By the way, I hope we'll get to it today. We're going to talk a lot about the street. But hayav delil kashur baraglav. If there was a rope or some sort of a delil, what does it say here? Something had got entangled in the feet of the chicken. So what it's basically saying is, again, if the chicken had something which had got tied around its foot, that's not my chicken. That's the secondary thing which was tied around the foot of the chicken, and that thing with the foot of the chicken got tangled in whatever it is. Then once again, you don't pay full damage, you pay half damage. Okay, we good? That's regard to what we call regel. Let's look at Shane. Okay, Shane is eating. Okay, I've got a horse in the street. What's it going to eat? So let's see. Kate said, Shane mueret. How is the tooth of a beast, the mouth of a beast, an attested danger? The answer is, lecholet hara oila. It will eat stuff that it's used to eating. So if my animal ever, let's say I've got a horse in the street, and you come back with your shopping from the supermarket, and my horse puts its head into your shopping basket and eats your apples or your carrots, that's normal. And I have to pay. I should have muzzled my horse. I should have been careful. You have got the right to have your shopping in the street. I have to look after my horse and make sure my horse doesn't eat your shopping. Because the street is a normal place where people have shopping. It's a normal place where their horse is. But the shopping won't get harmed unless the horse does something to it. So I'm the aggressor. I have to be careful of my horse. And if my horse eats food, then I have to pay for it. But, and here's the next case, right? However, if it ate clothing or utensils, again, what happens if my horse ate your scarf, right? Then the owner only pays half damages. Why? Because this is untypical behavior. I don't need to worry that my horse is going to eat people's sweaters or people's coats. Of course, by the way, if I knew that my horse had taken a liking to eating wool, then that might be a different situation, right? But that's, again, is the rule about what is expected, what is not expected. Let's take a look. Bamed medvarim amurim bershut hanizak, aval bershut harabim patur. Okay, so what does it say? So hold on a second. This applies in the domain of the damaged party. Sorry, I made a mistake. But it was in the public domain, the owner is not liable. Sorry, take back what I said before. Where is do I have to pay full damages for my animal? If my horse went into your garden and ate all of your tomatoes or ate your shopping, then I have to pay, right? If it ate your sweater, then I wouldn't have. I would pay half. However, in the streets, everybody's got to look after themselves. I've got to look after my horse, and you've got to look after your shopping. That's what they're saying. In the streets, that's what you have to do. If it's within the public domain, the owner's not liable. Apparently, they're saying the public domain is so public that everybody has to watch their stuff. Yasmin.
That was actually what I was about to ask. Does the street constitute public space? And
yes,
since we're talking about
we'll see in a minute. We're going to see in a minute. Let's just keep reading for a second, and then if the but let's say my horse did eat your shopping. So you're going to say to me, I'll say to you, you should have looked after your shopping. You say you should look after your horse. So we're going to say, 1 second, this is the street. Everybody's going to look after their stuff. But you're going to turn around to me and say, but you know what? You would have had to feed your horse a pile of hay today. And now you're not going to need to feed it because it just ate my shopping. So at the very least, you should pay me the meal that now you don't need to give your horse. I understand. I should have looked after my shopping. I should have been watching it more closely. I got involved in a conversation I didn't realize. But at least you should pay what you got from it. And that's what the Talmud says next. If the beast benefited, the owner pays what it benefited. So if I don't need to give my animal dinner now, the very least I can do is pay you what I don't need to pay. How does the owner pay with the animal benefits? If it ate from the middle of the marketplace, the owner pays what the animal benefited. If it ate from the sides of the marketplace, the owner pays for the damage the animal did. If it ate from the front of the store, the owner pays what the animal benefited. If it ate from the inside of the store, the owner pays what the damage the animal did. In other words, there's a second stage of the sugya. And it says, fine, imagine you've got a street. You also got the sides of the street. So you've got the street where usually the animals go, and the side of the streets, people will frequently put a pack down by the side. You don't really expect the animals to be there because they're not on the sidewalk. And the sidewalk's a reasonable place. So they're actually making a distinction between different parts of the street, right? They're saying in the central thoroughfare, we can expect animals to eat, but from the sides, I don't expect animals to eat. If they're walking through the marketplace from the stall in the front of the shop, if an animal decides to eat the apples at the front of the shop, which were left in the street, you know what? You'll just pay for what the animal benefited. That animal poked its head inside the store. That's unreasonable, right? That's unreasonable. So it's very interesting to see this big debate, right, about what's reasonable, what's expected, what's unreasonable, and all these sorts of things. Okay, did that answer the question, Yasmin?
I was gonna complicate it a little bit more because
Great.
yay, because where I live, there are Eruvin. So how does that play into it? So for example, I live in Brooklyn and the Eruv goes to the edge of the sidewalk. So if you have an animal in the street, if the animal crosses over the Eruv, how does that play into public versus private space?
Right, interesting question. I don't think it would be affected by the Eruv as a halachic boundary. I think they're more talking about, realities, right? The street is a fascinating topic. I hope, as I said, I hope we're going to get to it. Let's just quickly go to the next Mishnah so we understand what's going on. We read Mishnah 4. Let's read Mishnah 3. You have a dog or a goat, and they jump off the roof. Right? You've got to expect dogs, and remember, they're probably talking about a roof, which of a one-story building. It might even be on the side of a hill. So, they might have got onto the roof very easily, and now they jump down. And that is to be expected. They are tested dangers. It's predictable. You've got to watch it, right? Here's a gorgeous example, okay? We're going to talk about something called a charara. A charara is you take dough and you put dough on, let's say you made a fire and you've got coals and you need to make some bread for lunch. So you're making your meat on the coals or whatever. You've put a cauldron on the coals to make soup. You also want to make bread. So you made a dough and you lay the dough onto the coals, right? Yeah. That's what they talk about. In Tanakh, this is actually called a, 1 minute. In Tanakh, it's called a, 1 minute. I'll get there. Yeah, ugat ritzafim. That's what it's called in Tanakh. Whichever way, they used to take some dough and they used to put it on the coals. We actually had a situation like this once. We went to an Airbnb and we thought that we would be able to use the oven there and kosher it. And it wasn't, the oven didn't work and we had no way to cook our food in this apartment. And we wanted to make bread. We were on vacation. There was no kosher bread in the area. And that's exactly what we did. We made a barbecue that night and then we put dough on the coals and it made actually very nice bread. But here's the story, okay? There's still a burning coal attached to the bread. When they took the bread up, it had a coal which got embedded in it, right? Now your dog goes and eats and takes the bread off the fire. Is it normal for a dog to take bread? Yes, dogs like food. Is it normal for dogs to take coals? No. The dog ate the bread, it got to the coal, and it simply got its mouth burnt, so it dropped the coal. But what happened then? The coal set a haystack on fire, right? Now that's a freak accident, right? My dog ate a coal and dropped it on a haystack. That's weird, right? So look what it says here. A dog that took a cake while there was a cinder attached and went to a stack of grain and ate the cake and burned the stack of grain. For the cake, the owner pays full damages. For the stack of grain, the owner pays half damages, right? That one was predictable, one was unpredictable. Okay? I think we've established our rules here. our ground rules, I think we're good. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, because I'm going to, oh, so one thing before we finish, before we move on to chapter 3, but let's take a look at Mishnah number 6 in chapter 2. Adam mu'ad le'olam, ben shogeg, ben mezid, ben ben yashem. Human beings are always in attested danger, whether the damage is caused inadvertently or deliberately, whether the person is awake or asleep, right? Doesn't make a difference, okay? Human beings need to say, the person says, I lash out in my sleep. I don't know what I'm doing at 3 in the morning when I get up to go to the bath. I don't care. You're a human being. You are responsible. All the other cases are talking about an animal or talking about a fire or a pit, which doesn't have intelligence. Human beings have intelligence, and intelligence means we have culpability, okay? And therefore, you have to pay, okay? This is talking about monetary payment, but you have to pay. If a man blinded his fellow's eye or broke his utensils, he may pay full damages. Lease.
So I'm wondering, and I realize that the story of the axe flying off the axe handle, which is inadvertent, which is directly tied to kavanah. But I just wonder if that figures into this as well.
So first of all, this is not talking about capital cases, right? We're talking about actual damage, okay? So like, for example, if I didn't realize that I had left the iron on and I caused a fire, right? And it burnt my neighbor's room or something like that, yeah? I think what they're basically, I think there can be cases which are freak accidents, and we're going to talk more about human damage when we get to chapter 8, Hachova. So hold off, probably won't be next class, it'll be the class after that, when we get to Hachova. Okay, Chana. I can't hear you.
Okay. There seems to be a disconnect to me. Like, if the human being is responsible for anything that happens that he does, because you're a human being and you're responsible. So by extension, the human being is the owner of these animals that are causing all of this damage. So there seems to be a disconnect in that blanket statement. The person is responsible for everything that he does, no matter what, even if he's asleep, even if whatever. But then you're also saying, but the human being is not responsible for the animals that he owns.
Right. So
right,
I guess what we're saying is that the human beings are responsible for direct actions of the human being, right? However, these are indirect. This is my animal. This is my actual property causing damage. And that's why we created those categories, okay? Each of the categories have their own rules. The ox, the goring ox, the eating ox, the treading ox, the fire, the pit, and the human is in its own category, which is like fully responsible for anything that I do. So if I yawn and I knock something over, I'm still responsible because I didn't need to do that. I could have just kept my hands down, right? But that's different from, let's say, now it's true that if I know that my dog is likely to jump off the roof and damage things, or if I know my dog is likely to bite, I'm fully responsible because that's expected damage, right? But again, the average dog owner can go to a park, take their dog off a leash, and the dog won't cause damage. They, by the way, might run into somebody's picnic basket, right, and either eat from it or dirty the picnic tablecloth. That's why regel, we expect a dog to be able to be normal to tread. We expect it normal for a dog to eat, but we don't expect a dog, unless they have a history of it, to bite, for example. And then the question is, how much are we allowed normal things within, normal life? That's actually going to be, we're going to leave it here for today. And next time we're going to focus more on chapter 3 and some other things, and we're going to talk about the Rashut HaRabim, the street, right? And the laws of the street. And that's going to be more our understanding. I know you were meant to learn chapter 3 this week. Keep learning through chapter 4 and 5. But I think our class next week will focus a little bit on the rights and exemptions of the street, okay, which it just has a fascinating atmosphere to it, the chapter 3. And we'll try and say a few generic things about chapter 4 and 5 next week, okay? All right.
Thank you.
Toda Rabba. I hope that's given people a sense of perspective and that you're getting to see the major concepts of the Masechet, getting into the language and sort of the categories.
All right. And I just
Thank
wanted to
you.
say thank you to everyone who's come. Best of luck following with the Mishnah Yomit schedule for next week. All right. Take care, everyone.